He shot a man in broad daylight, walked 8 miles into town, and turned himself in. This is the true story of Nimrod O'Kelly, a landowner, a loner, and a man behind one of Oregon's first recorded murders. The year was 1852. 8 miles south of what's now Corvallis, in the wilderness of Benton County, justice looked very different than it does today. O'Kelly's trial made headlines. His sentence shocked the frontier, and yet somehow, his story nearly disappeared from history. This is the forgotten frontier, and this is the story of Nimrod O'Kelly. O'Kelly had migrated from Tennessee to the new Oregon Territory, where he claimed 640 acres under the Donation Land Act, half in his name, and half reserved for his wife, Sarah, often called Sally, who had not yet arrived. She was a devout Catholic, and likely the reason O'Kelly embraced the faith. Together, they would go on to raise 10 children. But in a time when land claims were marked by little more than a cabin and a few rough fences, boundaries were often blurred, and just as often, challenged. Jeremiah Mahoney moved onto the far edge of O'Kelly's claim. No notice, no permission. And on the frontier, that wasn't just trespassing. It was a challenge, a declaration of war. There were no threats, no shouting, no fight. O'Kelly met Mahoney near the Long Tom River, and without a word, pulled the trigger. A single blast of buckshot ended the dispute, and a life. Then, just as plainly, O'Kelly walked to Corvallis and turned himself in. No attempt to hide, no remorse. He jumped my land, O'Kelly said. I shot him, and that was that. The legal wheels turned quickly. Nimrod O'Kelly, a citizen of Benton County in the Oregon Territory, was accused and ultimately found guilty of murdering Jeremiah Mahoney, a fellow settler. The shooting took place on O'Kelly's land, roughly 8 miles south of Corvallis, near Highway 99 West. It was the first recorded murder trial in Benton County history. O'Kelly was sentenced to hang on August 2, 1852. A motion for a new trial was quickly denied. The case was appealed, but in 1853, the Territorial Supreme Court upheld the conviction. In October, O'Kelly once again stood before the bench for resentencing, this time under the gaze of Chief Justice George H. Williams. Years later, Williams would find himself entangled in legal controversy of his own. In 1871, he was appointed U.S. Attorney General by President Ulysses S. Grant. But his political ascent was soon overshadowed by scandal. In December 1873, Grant nominated Williams to become Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, the highest judicial office in the nation. The nomination, however, quickly unraveled amid allegations that Williams had misused Justice Department funds to buy an expensive carriage for his wife. Rumors spread swiftly through Washington, casting a shadow over his credibility. On January 9, 1874, a frustrated President Grant withdrew the nomination by formal letter to the Senate. The troubles did not end there. In 1875, Williams resigned as U.S. Attorney General after his wife was accused of accepting bribes to influence a federal case. She had allegedly received $30,000 to persuade Williams to drop litigation against the New York mercantile firm Pratt & Boyd, which was under investigation for fraud. But the story doesn't end there. Tucked into Portland's historic Northwest neighborhood stands an imposing structure, now divided into 10 upscale condos. Today, it's known as the George H. Williams Townhouses, or more commonly, the Lawn. In its heyday, the Lawn served as an annex to an even grander Victorian mansion that once loomed on the corner of 18th and Cooch, a house so elaborate it was called the finest private residence in Portland. That original mansion was demolished in 1916. This property was once home to George H. Williams and his wife, Kate, and to one of Oregon's most bizarre and little-known religious sects, a group that called itself simply Truth. At the center of it all stood Kate Williams, the judge's wife, who was widely blamed for her husband's fall from grace in Washington. Back in Oregon, Kate rebranded herself as a prophetess and spiritual leader, founding her own Christian holiness sect. Though never officially a member, Williams initially attended her services, held in the grand parlor of their home. At first, the group seemed harmless, eccentric, maybe, but not dangerous. But by 1893, things took a dark turn. Kate developed a doctrine of extreme fasting, which she called going into the wilderness. She claimed it purified the spirit and led the way herself, launching a 40-day fast during which she consumed nothing but communion bread and wine. Her followers were urged to do the same. After one member died of starvation, Kate doubled down. She entered her own wilderness, a grueling 110-day fast, surviving only on tiny morsels of communion bread and sips of wine. It was too much. In April 1894, the 61-year-old prophetess succumbed to starvation and died in the house that bears her husband's name. Kate's sect never reached the deadly extremes of Corvallis's infamous Bride of Christ cult, the so-called Holy Rollers, but the parallels are chilling, and given more time, truth may well have followed a similarly tragic path. But long before any of that, back in 1853, Judge George H. Williams had a very different role: to re-sentence Nimrod O'Kelly. And he did, setting a new execution date for June 9, 1854. Exactly 2 years from the day of O'Kelly's original trial. But there was a problem. Benton County had no jail, no place to hold a condemned man. So Sheriff Dr. T.J. Wright gave O'Kelly a strange instruction. Go home. I won't need you until 11 a.m. on the 9th of June. But be here on time. O'Kelly went home. For 8 months, he lived freely, preparing his land for his family, putting his affairs in order. A man waiting to die, with a date circled on the calendar. The night before his execution, Nimrod O'Kelly arrived in Corvallis, just as he promised. He walked to the sheriff's office and offered himself up. But Sheriff Dr. T.J. Wright wasn't ready for him until morning. So O'Kelly asked to inspect the gallows. He wanted to be sure the job would be done right. He gave it his approval, then headed to the hotel. The state would be picking up the bill. He slept soundly, ate breakfast, settled his account. He refused to die in debt, and kept that promise to himself. At 11 a.m., he strolled casually to the hanging ground. The sheriff shook his hand. Friends came to say goodbye. Even the church offered its final blessings. O'Kelly was calm, resigned, at peace. He later told a friend, "The prospect of death was not alarming. I believed I was changing to a better world, and had no regret at leaving this one." But just before the hour struck, a rider arrived. Governor John Wesley Davis had issued a last-minute reprieve. O'Kelly's sentence was commuted to 1 year in the Oregon State Penitentiary. O'Kelly didn't flinch. He simply nodded and made ready to travel to Portland. Sheriff Wright and his hired guard loaded O'Kelly into a wagon bound for the state prison in Portland. Their journey was fueled by whiskey and good humor, except for O'Kelly, a devout temperance man who stayed sober and silent. When the prison wagon broke down near Oregon City, O'Kelly didn't wait. He simply picked up his pack and started walking. Through the tall firs of the Willamette Valley, along muddy trails and wagon ruts, he made his way, alone, to Portland. No chains, no guards, just a man, reporting for punishment, on foot. But getting into prison wasn't as simple as showing up. When O'Kelly reached the gates of the Oregon Penitentiary and told the guards he was there to serve a commuted sentence for murder, they didn't believe him. No paperwork, no escort, just an old, gray-bearded man with nothing but his word. For hours, they turned him away. But when the sheriff finally arrived and confirmed the story, the gates opened. Nimrod O'Kelly's prison sentence had officially begun. He served 10 months with good behavior and walked free. But the battle for his land wasn't over. The widow and children of the man he'd killed still occupied half his claim, and the Oregon Land Office had awarded it to them. So, late that summer, Nimrod O'Kelly did what few would ever consider. He bid his newly reunited family farewell and set out on foot for Washington, D.C. He couldn't afford a horse. He had no wagon, just a fierce resolve and a claim to defend. Alone, he crossed the continent, walking alongside immigrant trains headed west, while he moved east. No maps, no roads, just determination. His mission, to plead his case before the head of the General Land Office himself. O'Kelly made it to the Capitol, stood before the General Land Office, and told his story. And they believed him. Andrew Johnson, the man who would one day become president, helped prepare the paperwork. O'Kelly's claim was approved. His 640-acre bounty restored. His land reclaimed. O'Kelly returned to Benton County a free man, and once again, a landowner. His family was waiting. It was his third time crossing the United States on foot. The first, his migration from Missouri to Oregon along the Oregon Trail. The second, a journey from Oregon to Washington, D.C., to fight for his land claim. And the third, his final return home. He spent his remaining years in quiet obscurity. Some said he was a man of education, once even training for the priesthood. But no records survive, only stories, passed down through generations, shaped by memory, myth, and admiration. What is known is that he was Catholic, deeply, unwaveringly so. Before his death, in either 1864 or 1865, the historical record is unclear. Nimrod O'Kelly deeded most of his land to the Catholic Church, leaving his children just enough to prevent them from contesting the will. Some call the devotion taken to extremes. Others saw it as penance. Perhaps it was both. Nimrod O'Kelly died as he lived, unbending, unknown, and utterly unforgettable. It's believed he was buried somewhere on his homestead, in an unmarked grave now lost to time. His wife Sarah outlived him by a decade. She was laid to rest in St. Mary's Cemetery in Corvallis, Oregon. No headstone marks her grave, only fading records. In memory, Nimrod O'Kelly wasn't a villain, and he wasn't a saint. He was something older, a relic of another age, a time when property meant survival, justice came from a rifle, and a man could walk across a continent if the government broke its promise. A killer? A hero? A fool? A prophet? History doesn't judge him clearly, but it remembers him. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more forgotten history. And tell us, who do you think Nimrod O'Kelly really was? Leave your thoughts below.